We are blessed to have Mimi Greenwood Knight as our speaker today. When she is not gathering eggs from her chickens and growing her own food, she is writing. I'm waiting for you to buy a cow and start milking too.
I just want a cow.
You want? Did you? Like most writers, she is more comfortable writing it than saying it. She doesn't do much public speaking, but she made an exception for me. I feel so honored and I'm very grateful. Mimi is a freelance writer with thousands of articles published in regional and national magazines, including Sesame Street, Parents, Campus Life, In Touch Magazine, Inside New Orleans, and North Shore Living Magazine. She also has 50-plus essays in more than 30 anthologies, including the popular Chicken Soup series and Cup of Comfort series by Simon & Schuster Publishing. We will have a question and answer session after her presentation, so if you have any questions or comments, wait until she's finished and wait till I can get over here with my little tiny mic so we can get your question recorded, because I do put this audio in the newsletter for the members who could not make it or live too far away. We do have some out-of-state members. So, Miss Mimi, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for asking me. And thank y'all for being here on a Saturday morning. I found these name tags that I think belong to y'all. So I'm just going to read them out since I don't know everybody's names, and just tell me if this is your name. Procrastinator Pat. Is anybody? Is that you? Okay, here's your name tag. Long-winded Wanda. That would be you. Oh, I gave you two. Okay. Oh, run-on sentence Rita. Anybody? No, she didn't make it today. Grammar Nazi Nell or Ned. Grammar Nazi back here. I get accused of that, and I only do it in my head. I never do it verbally. Comma Happy Kathy. Anybody? Okay. Missy the Misspeller. You're so honest. That's why we have spell check. Carpal tunnel Carl or Carla. Carpal tunnel. Anybody? No. How about ADD Anna or Al? That's me. ADD right there. Okay. Facebook Frida or Fred. Nobody's tempted like I am. That's you, Facebook. They say that being a writer is 94%. No, it's 6% talent and 94% not being distracted by the internet. That's me. Logophile less. Any word lovers? No. Tori the storyteller. And Rock on Tour Ron. They didn't make it today. Okay. Well, Tina asked me, like she said, she asked me to speak, and I started writing so that I could tell my stories without having to speak, so I could write them down. But it's funny because right before you asked me, we had an evangelist speaking at our church, and he was talking about how so few Christians will share their faith. That people think, well, I'm not a preacher, I'm not an evangelist. But the point that he was trying to make is we all have one story that we can uniquely tell, and that is, what has Christ done in my life? You're the one who can tell that story. So Tina asked me that right afterwards, and I thought, well, I'm not a writing teacher, but I could tell you what writing's done in my life, and I could tell you all the mistakes that I made and the lessons that I've learned from them. So that's what I'm going to do. So my story, I guess my story starts in the fact that I was the 11th of 12 kids. So I didn't get a lot of parenting. I had wonderful parents, don't get me wrong, wonderful devoted parents who worked their fingers to the bone to send us all to Catholic school. But nobody really asked me, like, don't you have homework? So I basically didn't do it. And nobody was there to say, isn't this exam week? Shouldn't you be studying? So I just didn't really study. So I was a C student. I kind of coasted through. My husband and I watch Jeopardy now, and y'all, I don't know geography in Louisiana, much less anywhere else. I don't know history. I don't know math. But there was this subject called English that, for whatever reason, I was good at that. And as a kid, I didn't feel like I was good at very much. And then God sent me a teacher in junior high and a teacher in high school that were just phenomenal teachers. And they happened to be my English teachers. Now, I may have had phenomenal math teachers and it went over my head. I don't know. But Mrs. Sevis, Elena Sevis, was my English teacher in junior high, and Patrice Cedar in high school. She was right out of college, so she was probably 4 years older than I was, at that point in high school. But they both taught creative writing, and they both encouraged me. And I just wasn't getting a lot of encouragement academically, and I didn't have a lot of things that I thought I am good at this thing. But when I would do my writing, I thought I'm kind of good at this, right? So that's what I took away from that. Well, then I went on, I did a little college, but I'm extremely ADD. So college was a challenge. I majored in elementary education. I didn't go very far. Got my MRS. Um, and I went into sales. Well, that was something else that was good. I was very good at sales. So I sold advertising for the Times-Picayune. And I sold advertising for the Yellow Pages, traveled all over the state. My daddy was a salesman, and like I said, put 12 of us through Catholic school, so he was an extraordinary salesman. So I was good at that. Well, then we decided to have kids a little bit late. I was 30, my husband was 40. So we said, let's do this right. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to stay home. And I was not a Christian at the time. And I hear people say, money was my God, fitness was my God. Well, parenting was my God at that time. I read every parenting magazine I could get my hands on. I read every parenting book. I eventually became president of the Parenting Center on the North Shore, which is a nonprofit group over there. And I wanted to do this the best I could. I had these 3 kids. We had 3 kids really, really fast, and then we closed the factory. And then God has a sense of humor because 8 years later we adopted a baby. So we weren't really through. We just thought we were through. But I wanted to get it right. And when you have kids, you tell them, you can be anything you want to be. You can do it, and you mean it. You can do it, and you have no limitations. Well, when my kids were 5, 3, and a baby, I was just talking to myself one day, and I said something like, oh, I always wanted to be in magazines. I always wanted to get something published in a magazine or something. I don't know if I meant it or not. And my little Molly said, Mommy, you can do anything you want to do. And I thought, no, honey, you can do anything you want. I have all these limitations, right? I wasn't a good student. I'm not smart. I had all these limitations in my mind. But here were these, she had these little glasses. She was the cutest thing. And she's looking up at me. And I thought, she's going to do what I do, not what I say. So I decided to make a show of trying to get published in a magazine. Still didn't think it would happen. But I had these 2 little girls, 5 and 3, and then our son was a baby. And I thought they need to see that Mommy believes this, even though Mommy didn't really believe it at the time. So I'm a stay-at-home mom. We had, basically, my husband and I had identical income. So when I quit working, we cut our income in half and then increased our expenses, by having kids. So to say that I had no disposable income, I had no disposable income. So I made a proposal to my husband. Now, this was about the year 2000, so it was before home computers, or at least in my house, it was before home computers. So I made a proposal, and I said, I'm going to need letterhead. I'm going to need postage. I'm going to need, big envelopes, whatever the things I figured out I would need to start trying to get into magazines, start proposing things to magazines. So I brought my husband this very official-looking proposal, and he accepted it, and he gave me the money to start my writing business. So I had actually been writing essays at the time about parenting because it was so much. It was overflowing. I had to do something with it. So I was writing it down. And to tell you how little I knew, I was writing essays, but I didn't know that's what they were called. I didn't know that thing that I was doing had a beginning and a middle and an end, and a little humor to it. I didn't know what to call it. So I started, at the time I was reading Parents Magazine. And when I say I was reading it cover to cover every month and just devouring it. So I started sending these stories off to Parents Magazine. And I didn't tell anybody what I was doing except for my husband. Well, one night I was having coffee with a friend, and I thought, I got to tell somebody. So I told her what I was doing, and she said, get in my car. So we got in her car, and she drove me to Books A Million, and she got me a copy of The Writer's Market. It was about that thick. I didn't bring a copy because I always give my copies away. But it was, I remember it was $50. And that was so much money. I'm thinking, that's 2.5 bags of diapers. You know, that's 2 tanks of gas in my minivan. I didn't have $50, but she said, if you don't buy it, I'm buying it for you. Well, I couldn't let her do that, so I bought the book, and thank God I did, because if you're not familiar with it, it's pretty thick book, and the one I got, they have them for every kind of different genre of writing, but the one I got was for magazine writers because that's what I was interested in. Well, the first about quarter of the book, like if you picture Old Testament, New Testament, except switch it around. So about that, that much at the beginning of the book is exactly what to do to get started. How to write a query, how not to write a query. It has examples of queries that were accepted and went on, to be published, and examples of queries that weren't, and why. It had interviews with a couple of editors, very in-depth interviews, saying what turns you off to a writer, what attracts you to a writer, what do you buy, why do you buy it, what are you looking for, what do you never get that you wish you could find. And then the second 3/4 of the book, which is a really valuable part, and I remember at the time it was 700 specific magazines, a few lines from the editor, but it tells you what they buy, what they pay, how they pay, what they don't buy, do they pay a kill fee, all these real specific information about these different magazines, and genres like bicycling, camping, lumber, women's magazines, Christian magazines, every kind of magazine that you would want, you just could go to that section, lifestyle magazine, and see very specifically, these are the magazines that are available, this is what they buy, and all the information that you need to know. Well, the first thing I learned was everything I'd done was wrong. Everything up until that point was just garbage. But I started following exactly what they said in this magazine. And one of the things they talked about was writing clips, which back then was a physical Xerox copy. Here's something I've had published. And it's kind of like when you want a job, but you can't get a job because you don't have experience, but you can't get experience because you don't have a job. It's like you want to get published, but you can't get published so you can show that you've been published kind of thing. Well, this is such a God thing. But like I said, I was president of the Parenting Center, and we had a woman, and I forget if she was a pediatrician or a children's psychiatrist, but she started doing a column in the local paper, and it was Dear Parenting Center. So parents would ask questions, and she would answer them. She'd been doing it for about a year. Well, both of her parents were elderly, and I think they maybe both had dementia, so she needed to back off of some things. So she told us she couldn't write it anymore, and I said, I can write it, thinking, I don't know if I can write it or not, but I'm going to try. So I started where she would have the question, she would answer it as the expert. If somebody asked a question about teething, I would go talk to my to my children's dentist. And if they ask like a physical problem with kids, I'd go talk to my pediatrician. So I started writing this column myself. Well, now I had my writing clips that I could send. So when I would send my essay off to Parents Magazine, I could say, and here's where I was published. Now, it didn't actually have my name on it, and nobody ever asked me a single question. I made them all up. But whatever my kids were doing at that time, like I remember the first one that I wrote, one of my kids refused to use toothpaste, and it was my Molly who bucked everything and still does. So I talked to her dentist, and I said, does she have to use toothpaste? Well, no, she doesn't. And so I had to answer from that. So now I had writing clips. And then the next thing it said was, it doesn't really matter where you get your writing clips, just get them. So in other words, start off with really small publications. And my second one was it was a women's newsletter. I don't even know if it's still around, but it was Formerly Employed Mothers at the Leading Edge. Yes, so it's spelled female. And it was for women who had worked and now they were home. So I had a couple of things published in that. And I don't remember if they even paid me. I don't know if it was a paying gig or if it was just a really small amount. But anyway, now I had clips and now I could send them off. So I still had these 2 little girls that were watching me. So what we did was every single time I would send a query, I would show them the envelope. And my little Molly was the cutest thing. She was very petite, and she had these little glasses and this little page boy haircut. And she would stand in the middle of the post office with these envelopes, and she would pray over them. And people would just walk around her, and she'd just stand there and she'd pray, and then she'd say, okay, Mom. And she'd give it to me, and I'd mail it. And we'd wait a couple weeks, and we'd get a rejection letter. And she'd pray over the next one, and we'd mail it, and we'd wait a couple of weeks, and we'd get rejection letter after rejection. And that's where having been a salesman came in handy, because as a salesman, you get these formulas like every 10th person is going to buy something from you. So 1 through 9 is just getting you that much closer. So the person who says no, you thank them and you go on your way and you go to the next person and the next person. So I kind of had that rejection already as a positive thing in my background. And then the other thing was that the writer's market talks so much about rejection. So you have it as a reality that this is good, this is normal, this is positive. And we started, the girls and I would get our rejection letters and we started hanging them on the wall. Now, my office at the time was our laundry room, which I think is fairly large as laundry rooms go. We filled from ceiling to floor 2 entire walls of rejection letters. And I thought, my girls, when they go out into the world someday, will always have this visual of these 2 walls of rejection and mama sitting at her typewriter, because it was a typewriter when I started out, plugging away, plugging away. I just wanted them to see that. And one day, somewhere in October, my phone rang and it was Parents Magazine in New York, and they bought 2 essays. And I remember specifically the woman said, "I'm sorry it's taken me so long. These have been sitting on my desk for months." And I thought, if only you knew how much I was dying for that phone to ring. And they were sitting on my desk for 2 months. And then a month went by and they bought another one. And then a funny thing happened. The girls and I took all those rejection letters down and we had a bonfire and we burned them. And I've wished I kept them since then. I kind of wish I still had them. But then I didn't sell anything for a while. Like I thought, okay, that part of my life is over. Now I started getting rejection letters again. So that's all part of it. And I got to a point where I was selling essays every few months. And I was selling to the big guys in New York. I was used to making no money. So when I got a check for $2,000, that might have been $2 million. To me, that's what it felt like. And then after a few years of doing that, one of the editors up there called me, and again, no internet. So she called me on the phone and said, "Are you interested in writing articles?" I don't know. So I tried that. And then I started writing articles for parents, for American Baby, for Working Mother, Sesame Street Parents. I became a pretty frequent contributor to them and to Parents for about 10 years for both of those. And I was in the trenches with the kids, so it was perfect timing. And it allowed me to stay home. I could still go on field trips. I could still, do all those things. I could drive my babies to school. I could pick them up. But still, I felt like I was contributing financially at home. So now when anybody asks me, and I'll have a lot of people say my daughter is studying journalism, my son, wants to be a writer, whatever, I'll say, when's their birthday? Get them a copy of Writer's Market. Nowadays, you can actually get a subscription online. So you pay for 1 year and you have access to their website for a year. And I would think that that's better because all that information from the editors is going to be updated. So, if it's 6 months old, 8 months old in the book, it would be updated online. What I did, back in the day when I was buying it pretty frequently, I would buy it every other year because that $50 was still a lot. I think it's actually only like $30 now. It got cheaper, but it was still a lot. So I would buy it every other year. And then again, I was calling and I was mailing things off. There was no internet. So one of my favorite examples of irony was I called Parents Magazine one time and I said, "Is Heather Gowan still editing the Working Mother page?" And she said, "No, she quit when she had her baby." I thought that was kind of ironic. So I made some notes kind of on advice I would give if you want to approach a magazine and how to go about that, and then some different advice on what to do once you get an assignment. So that was my first advice, obviously, is the writer's market is a great place to start. But where do you want to pitch your stories? So, they say in writing, write what you know. And that's great advice when it comes to trying to get into a magazine. So I was reading Parents Magazine. That's where I went. The other magazine that I was reading and still read is Country Living. It's kind of like Southern Living, but a little more country and a little more small scale. I still to this day have nothing in Country Living magazine, and I've proposed to them umpteen different times. That just didn't work out for me. But write what you know. So if you love golf, write a story about golf. If you love needlepoint, write a story about needlepoint. The other side of that is I actually, Tina alluded to, I have a little hobby farm on the North Shore, and I am the worst gardener you've ever met. I have chickens now. I went out this morning. One of them was killed last night. I'm not real good at that. Um, and I got my bees about a year ago, and I'm the worst beekeeper you've ever met. But guess what? You can write stories about being a terrible gardener. You can write, essays really. And I just had one come out in Living Magazine, which is in Texas, all over like Houston, Dallas area. I wrote a story about what a terrible gardener I am, and then going into beekeeping, what a terrible beekeeper I am. And this morning I opened up my email and I had a message from my editor saying, this reader wrote in and he wants you to call him. He has some questions about beekeeping. I thought, did you read it? Did you read how I'm not good at this? And would I call you and answer your questions, right? But write what you know, or I guess what you don't know, what you're really bad at. Each of us has a unique story that we can tell. Every single person in this room. So I'm 11th of 12 kids. I can write about what it's like to be from a big family. We adopted our youngest child. I can write about what it feels like to be an adoptive mom. And then, he starts showing some interest in writing. He's 16 now. So as he gets older, he can write about what it's like to be an adopted child. One of our daughters, actually, when she was 12, was published in Walmart has their own like in company magazine, and she wrote an article because we got Jonah at Walmart. When they called to say we knew we were getting a baby, but we didn't know like between birth and 3 years old. So we had a crib, but that's all we had. And they called to say we have a 1-year-old boy. It's the weirdest phone call I ever got. We have a 1-year-old boy entering the system. Do you want him? I'm like, did you just call me and offer me a human being? This might be the weirdest phone call I've ever gotten. But my next thought was, I don't have diapers, I don't have clothes, I don't have anything for a 1-year-old baby. And she said, don't worry about it. We'll meet you at Walmart. We'll get everything you need. So I went into Walmart with 3 kids and I left with 4 kids. So I might be the only person who got my baby at Walmart. So my daughter wrote an article about getting her brother at Walmart, and they published it in the Walmart magazine. Okay, that's her unique story. Nobody else has that story. Study back copies. So once you decide that you want to pitch a certain magazine, and if you don't already, aren't reading it religiously, get some back copies. And if you contact the magazine, generally they have a bunch of back copies sitting around that they don't need, and they'll sell them to you for $1. Then they'll mail you, however many you ask for. What I do is I get on Facebook, because I'm a big Facebooker, and I just say, hey, anybody got back copies of Ladies Home Journal? And a lot of times somebody's got a stack that they've been meaning to recycle, and they'll give them to you. I talked about starting small. You can also get online and just Google call for submissions, and you'll see who's calling for submissions, who's looking for submissions. And there's certain websites that'll gather all those together for you. Like one of them is Writer's Gazette. And I love Writer's Gazette because not only does she give you a list of, who's calling for submissions right now, but she'll also, for a very minimal fee, she'll give you a little writer's page. So when somebody Googles your name, it'll go to that page. And then once you have some writing clips, you can start putting it on there. I think mine's very outdated because I looked at it the other day and all the links I went to were like expired. So I need to update mine. Once you do land that assignment, you want that editor to be your best friend. So you don't want to do anything to alienate them. And some of the things you can do, well, initially when you're proposing it, if you propose something that's not their thing, you've just alienated an editor. So if you, for instance, if it's a secular magazine, you propose a Christian article, or vice versa. If it's a Christian magazine, you propose something that's clearly, I don't know, pro-abortion or so. That's extreme, but don't alienate them by not knowing their magazine, and don't propose something they just did, because you're going to alienate them that way too. Once you have the assignment, you want to know certain things, and generally the magazine's going to tell you right off the bat. But if they don't, you want to ask, what's my word count? Sometimes it's open. Like I write for Inside New Orleans and Inside North Shore, and they pay me $1 a word. They don't care how many words I send. Now there's on the short end they care. They want more than 1,000, but if I go 2,000, 2,500, whatever, they don't care. They're just going to pay me so much per word. Other places is different. When I was writing for Parents Magazine, one of the places that I wrote for consistently is they have a section called as they grow. And it starts with pregnancy, and it goes through pregnancy, infant. You're nodding your head, and then it goes through toddler, preschooler, on into, like, I think it stops at preteens. Those are very formulaic. It's 1,800 words, and within that 1,800 words, they want 900 words of straight copy. They want a bulleted list. They want a factoid. They know exactly what they want, and you need to send them exactly what they want. They don't need to write back and go, "This is great, but this is what we asked you for." You need to send them that. Know what your deadline is, and I may be the only writer in the whole world who I never miss a deadline. I'm funny about that. I'm a big procrastinator, and I tell my editors all the time, don't ever tell me, get it to me when you get it to me, because you're never going to get it. If they say, well, I'd like it by May the 1st, but whenever, you're never going to get it, because all these other ones that have deadlines are going to keep jumping in front of it. So I tell my editors, even if you have to make up a fake deadline and just tell me like it's etched in stone, and you'll get the story. But know what your deadline is, and stick to your deadline. Make a friend of your editor. Nowadays, and this makes me sad, but most magazines are not going to copy straight text, unless you're talking National Geographic or the New Yorker. Everything's got to be kind of broken up into bite-sized pieces, because we're all in a hurry. You're flipping through a magazine. I tried to read my daughter's New Yorker the other day, and my brain could not. I couldn't do it. Like I said, I'm ADD, but they want they want text, but they also want call out boxes with little bits of information, bulleted lists within your texts, little fact here, little quote there. Where the lazy reader, and we're all getting to be lazy readers, is going to be able to, it's bite size, and they're going to be able to digest it. While you're working on an assignment, and this is a lesson that I learn and learn and learn, go back and revisit the assignment from the editor. I mean, generally nowadays it's going to be an email, and as you're going, go back and check, am I giving her what she asked for? Because again, that's a great way to alienate an editor, is they tell you specifically what they want, and you don't send them that. Now, sometimes as you're writing it, you see that there's another way that really would be better. You start interviewing your experts, and you think, well, we're trying to make this point, but really the point is over here. That's fine, but call the editor and give her the chance to say yes or no. Give him the chance to say yes or no, because they know what else is going in the magazine, and you may be recreating what somebody else is doing or whatever. But if you want to go a different way with the story, that's great, but just call the editor and say, look, listen to this. What do you think about this? And generally they'll say, great, chase it, go with that. That sounds great. A few books that I love to recommend, and you guys may or may not know these, but this is the Bible, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. She is the writer's writer. This is one of the most delightful, just life-giving, joyful books, and very quirky and kind of irreverent. That's her sense of humor. She is a Christian. I will say she is much more liberal than I am. And you'll get that as you read it, but I mean, she is a Christian. It's a memoir, and it's also writing advice. She teaches writing, so she talks about her writing class, but she does get off on a lot of things about her life. But it's excellent, and it's very no nonsense. She talks about giving yourself. She talks about a 1-inch picture frame. Don't write any more than what you can see in a 1-inch picture frame, so you don't get overwhelmed and go, I have to write 1,000 words right now. Just write that. And then write that, and then as you go down. And she talks about terrible first drafts and how that's what you're supposed to be writing, is a terrible first draft. She says your first draft should be so bad that if you died in the middle of writing it and your friends and family read it, they would think that you killed yourself because you'd lost all your talent. That's how bad. And she's got wonderful quotes in here. Listen to this quote. This is from Flannery O'Connor. Anyone who survived childhood has enough material to write about for his or her life. Tell your story. Yeah, she's wonderful. This is another one, and I know a lot of people dismiss Stephen King, but this is an excellent book on writing. And again, very no nonsense. It's like that. It's a memoir, but it's also, he talks about his childhood. He talks about his drug addiction, a lot of things like that. But it's great advice that you can really use about writing. One of the things that I took away from this was dialogue attribution. Don't say Tina gushed or, Ingrid bellowed. Just say said. Always say said when you're attributing dialogue to anybody, and let the words tell them how they said it, or let the action tell them how they said it. Just a little piece of advice, but for me it really rang true. He also talks a lot about say what you got to say in as few words as possible. She talks about people sit down to commit the act of writing. Don't commit the act of writing. Just say it the way you would say it if you were talking. Your vocabulary may be where you want it to be. Mine was not. And in my 40s, I was very much aware that I wanted to have a larger vocabulary. So while my kids were taking piano and ball practice and all those things, I would sit and I found this. I had the first one and the second one. There may be more by now, but it's vocabulary cartoons. It's really fun. It takes a word, it gives you a really silly cartoon to kind of lock it in your brain. And then it gives you the definition, it gives you examples, and then at the end of each chapter, it gives you a test. I feel like I learned a lot of words from these books, and I did them more than once. This is just for fun, but if you write poetry, you need a rhyming dictionary. I only write poetry for fun thing, like for our family reunion or, for my Pequeno group when I'm being silly. But it's a hoot. Like, for instance, okay, you want to rhyme the word box. So you go to ox, O-X, and it just goes blocks, clocks, docks, flocks, fox, gawks, hawks, and then it gets into cash box, crosswalks, deadlocks, and it gets longer and longer like that. Jaywalks, knee socks, lunchbox. It's just fun if you're right. If you're writing poetry. Now, this is an old copy. They've done more books for writers, but this was a lifesaver for me way back in the back. It's not even an essay, but it's called Consider This. It lists famous writer after famous writer after famous writer and the rejection that they encountered. It really bolstered me early on to know that I'm in the same book as Margaret Mitchell, or I'm in the same book as Alex Haley. Listen to some of these. So Richard Hooker wrote MASH, the original book MASH, was rejected by 21 publishers before Morrow published it, became a runaway bestseller, spawning a blockbuster movie and a highly successful television show. So that story of MASH was rejected 21 times. I'd like to think that I would have kept going after 21 times. Some of these are outrageous. Louis L'Amour, who's the author of more than 100 Westerns and with 200 million copies, was rejected 350 times. I just don't know that I would keep putting myself out there 350 times. John Creasy was rejected 774 times for his first story. He went on to write 564 books using 14 different names. Julia Childs, and y'all might have seen the movie Julie and Julia. It talks about that. This is one of my favorite. Anybody know who Theodore Geisel is? Dr. Seuss. To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street was rejected 27 times by 27 different publishers. The 28 publisher Vanguard sold 6 million copies, and all of his children's books have sold 100 million copies. And I'm sure it's more than that because this is a fairly old book. Just on and on, page after page after page. Leo Tolstoy, Woody Allen, Louisa May Alcott, Rudyard Kipling. That's my favorite because I'm a big Rudyard Kipling fan. He received a letter from an editor that said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Kipling, you just don't know how to use the English language." Right? And where's the Woody Allen one? Woody Allen, oh, here it is. Flunked out of motion picture production school at New York University and the City College of New York. He also failed English at New York University. Malcolm Forbes, just on and on and on. That really helped me to know that, my little 2 walls worth of rejection letters was nothing compared to some of these guys. One thing I didn't mention when I was saying, when you receive an assignment that you want to know what the editor wants, most magazines are going to have a style book, and this is just one. Now, I used to get an actual book in the mail. Now they just send you a link on an email. But this is one of the magazines I write for quite a bit in Texas, and that's their style book. So the thing about a style book is it's not about what's right and what's wrong. It's just about making everything consistent within their magazine. So a lot of magazines will use the AP, the Associated Press style book. So if they tell you that, then you can Google Associated Press style book and know what they want. It's little things like the Oxford comma, the serial comma, which is the comma after a conjunction. Do they use it? Do they not? Again, it's not right or wrong to use a comma before a conjunction, but it's just what do they do so that somebody's not having to come behind you and fix it every time. And I actually just recently had an editor say to me, my copy editors love you because they have to do very little to your work. So I thought, yes, that it's true. That advice is true. Now, would they still buy things from me if they had to clean it up? Probably, maybe. I don't know. But I don't want to take a chance. And I tell you what, I never, ever turn anything into an editor that I don't say, thank you for trusting me with this. I never want to get so cocky that I think, well, of course they trusted me with it. You know, I got thousands of articles in print. I never want to be that person. I always want to be thankful for that one more assignment, and let them know that you appreciate them. And grease the wheel a little bit. Mardi Gras time, all my editors get king cakes. Christmas time, they get a little Cajun Kringle. That doesn't hurt, plus it's tax deductible. Um,